Hello everyone, good afternoon. We are starting 5 minutes late. Sorry about that. Now Federico is ready as the first presenter. The title of the presentation, Building a Culture of Resistance for the Struggles to Come. A little bio about Federico Venturini. He has a PhD, fresh PhD graduate, 1 year.
3 years ago.
3 years, wow.
Getting old.
From the Leeds, University of Leeds. He is a board member of TRISE since 2013. He is a co-editor for 2 books. One is our brilliant book from the previous conference. It's out there. We have launched last night. If you were not here, it's a much more reasonable price if you buy from the conference. You can buy for your friends as a gift for your universities or neighborhood libraries. And he has another co-editing book with Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jeffrey Mill.
Jefferson. A book about My Freedom is Yours.
My freedom and yours.
Yeah.
Your freedom is mine.
You can.
Okay. Okay. So hello to everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Yes. I want to apologize for a couple of things. The first, I tried to make a new presentation. Tried to take inspiration from the circular movements from yesterday. So please don't vomit in this room if your eyes are spinning too much. Okay, so sorry for that. I'm not using any text. I'm using only images, and of course, using images it means simplification. So please bear aware that they are just examples of the words that I will put on the images. So they are oversimplified. And then the last apology is that I used this conference as a guinea pig from you and also from the speakers, because I was the person that drafted the call of paper, and I used a concept, building a culture of resistance that doesn't exist in literature. And I really wanted to know what this concept can mean for different people, more than me. So it was a very nice experience to see different people framing that in a different way and to explore that concept. And my presentation is building from my previous research, both as a researcher but also research as an activist. And there are reflections on this concept that is so key to this conference. So we can start. So a starting point is that we are living in very troubling times, and we have 2 different crises. One is the environmental crisis, and the other one is the social crisis, and they are somehow interlinked and interdependent. At the same time, we have this crisis, but it's not just something that is in the real world. Us, as people that want to change the world, we are living also a crisis in our imagination. This is a time that was incredible for human history, when the Berlin Wall collapsed, and it didn't collapse by itself, but was destroyed, and was incredible and a movement of freedom, but at the same time also destroyed all the imagination from the left. Maybe that even happened before, but for sure that is a reference point that now the left, us, if you want to change the world, we don't have a language that can speak effectively to the people, and that is something that is linked to the imagination that is lacking. However, in the world there are examples of working experiments One is the Zapatistas' experiences in Chiapas with the Junta de Buen Gobierno. And they managed to move from a Marxist position in the 70s to something completely new. And now we have new Zapatism. When Marcos arrived, he was a Marxist, and he went to the mountains and said to the peasants, let's do the revolutions, and I will tell you how to do the revolution. So he spoke for 3 days, and then after 3 days, all the peasants and indigenous pueblos originarios, they said, okay, we listen to you, now you have to listen to us. And they started to speak, and they never stopped since then. And they managed to transform Marxism and the peasant revolution in something completely new. Something that happened also with the Kurdish revolution. Of course, this is a militaristic image, but it's also a reference to what is happening there at this time. So the Kurdish movement, Kurdish freedom movement, managed to move from a Maoist Marxist position from the 90s, and they understood that the state, to create a new state, the Kurdish state, was a nonsense because it creates problems. So they started to create democratic confederalism, and I will not go in the details in that, but for sure it's another example on how thinkers and movements can transform themselves and create a completely new thing, depending on space and time, and to be effective in what they are trying to do. So let's try to define culture of resistance. So culture resistance is something that is connected to the wider beliefs in our society. So that means that the culture is something that is very comprehensive, is very holistic, and is put in dialogue with all different aspects of our life. And this is quite straightforward, I think. On the other side, there is resistance, something that we really like, I suppose. However, resistance is not just going the streets, take the streets, and maybe shout, but that is the power to destroy. At the same time, there is also the power to create. So resistance means not just saying no, the scream of no for resistance that we can see in the street, but it's also the possibility to build a different world. And it's not just the possibility, there are effective examples in history and in reality. Like now, in this picture, the Zapatistas working in the field, or gene war. We said yesterday the experience of this incredible village only for women in the northeast of Syria. And then, of course, there is also all the projects that we are very active, like this is a food cooperative that we can speak about, social center or whatever that is coming from the grassroots. So these are living examples of resistance. So what I said is that cultural resistance is what we should do. However, at the moment is an empty box. What I would like to see is a full box. Full box of what? I think that social ecology is a very nice example of a very effective toolbox. There is a starting point, so that means an analysis of the present situation. There is the utopia, where we want to arrive. There is the nice, the garden cities, the imagination. We want to go there. And then there is a description of the different practices to arrive to that point. And at the same time, there is also a list or the analysis of all the different values that we need to have to achieve that with dialectical naturalism. And social ecology is just one example. I think that in every thoughts, revolutionary thoughts, there should be these tools that can allow to speak with the population. And why we want to speak with the population? Because we need to translate what we want, what we think that can be effective, also to other people, starting again from the social crisis and the environmental crisis. However, this is, we are not really able to do that. So cultural resistance is speaking about translating concepts that can be accessible to the people out there, but at the same time also to take concepts from other parts of the world and to translate them in something that can dialogue with our culture. And so I will speak about the process of building a cultural resistance. It's not just in that is that's it. It's a sign. It's a process. It's a process that I use this concept that is based on 3 moments: discover, engage, and transform. Skip it. I would say that in social movements, or us, in our daily practices, we discover something. That means that we listen to something, to a concept, we read, we speak to someone, and then we start to engage. We engage with that concept, we try to use that tool. And when we use that, then we start to have a different understanding of that. And then we will transform the tool, or we will transform that concept. So this is a process of knowledge production, and this is like a suggestion that can go to the social movements how to approach this building a culture of resistance. That is a never-ending process. And at the same time, building a cultural resistance is referring to the use of imagination. And here are coming some of the problems. Building a cultural resistance requires several things, but I'm focusing on 3 different things. The first is time. Social movements, activists, people that want to change the world, use the word that you want, already have a life. Sometimes they have a job, but at least they struggle to survive for the end of the month. And then they have the third part that is try to change the world. So we all know that our days are pretty full. And actually all the action are reaction. It's very difficult to be proactive. And building a cultural resistance means to create time to have the process that I mentioned before, so to discover, engage, transform, and to use our imagination. So this is a problem of time. And at the same time, it's also a problem of space. We need a space, a physical space, where not just 2 of us, the friends at the coffee place at the end of the road, but many people can gather together and organize and to discuss and to have the process that I mentioned before. That is a problem. I mean, as a TRISE organizer, to bring all together us, to be here in this room, that's been a very complicated process that's been long 2 years. And then we have the last problem, and that has been mentioned before, the use of imagination and sometimes also the use of, can say, technicality on the knowledge production. From my experience, it's very hard for people that want to change the world to sit down and start to think and reflect on what they are doing. That requires again, as I said, the time, requires the space, and also the commitment, the willingness, and also predisposition and the work to sit down and think. So with this very short presentation and with many images, I try to explain and suggest this kind of process. Building a cultural resistance is just a suggestion for you, all of you, to go back and maybe start to think, okay, the Zapatistas are working, the Kurdish movement is working, we are not very effective, what shall we do? Okay, maybe discover, engage, transform from different thinkers, and we have to create something new for our realities. And I use this word, building a cultural resistance, Because for me, words are very powerful tools. So for me, they are speaking about the possibility to change the world. But if you want, you can change them. Can be social ecology, can be anarchism, can be democratic confederalism, can be juntas de bon governo, whatever you want to call it. But definitely the point is to change this system that is not working. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the second presenter, Yavor Tarinski. The title is The Interconnectedness of Ecology and Democracy Towards a Strategy from Below.
Hello. I'm coming from, I live nowadays in Athens, but I come from Bulgaria, post-socialist country in the Balkans. And in the post-socialist period, the only vibrant social movement was the ecological one. But I was never really back then interested in ecology. Instead, I was interested in direct democracy in its authentic radical form, in its stateless anti-capitalist form. But by examining democracy, because I completely agree with Jacques Rancière, maybe the most important philosopher alive today. I completely disagree with the idea that there are many varieties of democracy, because then democracy becomes a shallow, emptied of meaning term. So democracy means a system in which people directly have the power, and there is no, like Chantal Mouffe or Jürgen Habermas would suggest, various kinds of different kinds of democracies, let's say, because then there is no meaning in the term. So by examining democracy through thinkers like Cornelius Castoriadis, Murray Bookchin, even Hannah Arendt, an interest arose in me regarding ecology. I got a sense that if democracy means a direct connection between the human with his social surrounding, then ecology offers a direct relation between the human and the natural environment, without any intermediates in this field. And this feeling was later on strengthened by the fact that I was seeing the inability of dominant structures, of statism, of capitalism, to address and to protect nature from their own activity. I have a wonderful quote here from Dimitris Roussopoulos from his book Political Ecology Beyond Environmentalism, but I'll not read it all. I will just synthesize the idea that we have hundreds of agreements signed between international bodies, which include nation states, which have led to very little progress in the tackling of the ongoing environmental degradation. Things are getting worse and worse, regardless of what the statesmen try to do. Then again, we have, and the state, it's this modernist idea that we need these large, Leviathanish scales to deal with our problems. And then there is the capitalist proposal, which have equally been destructive, like a green capitalism, like consume less products that have to do with plastic and so on, and things will get better. And we see also that there is very little effect of this on nature. And from the works of Bookchin and later on of Öcalan, I was impressed by their understanding. I think in a way also they echo the writings of Castoriadis in this, that we have to dig deeper than the nation state and capitalism. We have to see domination, the idea that one being dominates over other. This have been, Bookchin and Öcalan trace this to antiquity, to ancient times, with the emergence of patriarchy, gerontocracy, the idea that men can dominate women, that the knowledgeable dominate the ignorant, and so on. And these have been developing from then on like a snowball falling on a mountain. And if we do not separate ourselves, our societies, from domination, we cannot tackle the ecological crisis. There have been this conception, Nikos have grasped on this in a way yesterday, that ecology is a science, a type of a science, like politics is a type of a science. And that we could calculate certain things, we can produce a suitable technology and fix our problem. But then Castoriadis was among the people who said that science have nothing to do with the essence of ecology, because ecology have to do with the borders which humanity sets before itself regarding the nature. And in this sense, it echoes democracy, because Castoriadis, in the continuation of Rousseau, have suggested that democracy is the regime of social self-limitation, meaning a condition in which society and all its members directly set the regulations, laws, or in general the meanings which limit its activity and its negative influence on its members, on nature. And there is this wonderful passage of Ercan Ayboga, who said, in order to defend nature and ecological relations, destructive and exploitative projects need to be stopped, and the models of housing, production, consumption, mobility have to be altered radically. All this can be done only if democratic decision-making structures are dominant in the society. That is, radical democracy is developed, and no more small circles in society can influence via lobbying the political decisions. This is, I think, the question which interconnects ecology and democracy. The political decision to the question of who gets to decide how will limit our activity. Will there be a Levitanian structure like the nation state? Will there be a barbaric and cannibalistic thing like the capitalist markets? And then I'll just briefly say a couple of elements which make all ecological structures.
You have time.
I have?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Because you saw me the 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, not yet.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. It was nice. So, I skipped down a lot of things because
No.
So, I will say some elements that I have been observing in ecological struggles, in environmental, let's say, struggles, because not always they're conscious ecological, but they're not environmental nonetheless. And they have certain elements which I think make them a fertile ground for the emergence of democratic practices. One of them is the temporality which environmental struggles have. Like Christine Ross suggests, environmental struggles tend to have very twofold outcome. Airport is being either built or it is not. Or to take the example of Greece and the river Achelos, or the Hasankeyf in Mesopotamia, you either build a dam and you set it in work or not. So it tends to take a lot of time for such project to be built if there is a resistance. And then, in combination with the spatial element, that often these struggles are being inhabited by those that struggle. That is, often we speak about communities that protect their area, their special dimension in the world, sets them in a direct opposition to both capitalist growth and to the nation state. I think these two together create a very fertile ground for this. And then there is another dimension of spatiality, the question of public space. We hear that today there is such time as public space. In the Western world, we have the right to assemble at the squares and so on, and all this is being referred as public space. But if we take the analysis of Castoriadis on what public space is, public space have little to do with just the space where you can assemble, and you're allowed to assemble. It has to do with the space within which the public can reinstitute itself and present itself, take decisions, and self-limit itself. I think this is non-existent in Western world. I think that many of the movements of the last decade have actually begun understanding this. They go beyond narrow economism, beyond quick fixes within the system, without the demand of higher wages and so on, and actually demanding the possibility to themselves determine how much they'll get and so on. We can take the example of participatory budgeting and many others. And I'll argue that we see a certain trend of the recreation, of the popular efforts at recreation of the public space from the Arab Spring until nowadays. In the Arab Spring, we saw in many countries public assemblies taking a certain shape. I will not go as far as to call them a public assembly, because public assembly as a term have certain meaning. But there were efforts to be created such institutions. And then we saw this to crystallize further in the Occupy, in the Indignados, further on here in the Syntagma Square, where we heard for the first time direct democracy now. Then we had the New Debut, who played with the element of temporality. They positioned themselves in a different calendar than the one that the work week had imposed on us. They continued counting May, regardless of the fact that they entered in June. They said, no, we do not start a new calendar month, nothing has changed, we continue, we live in May. We position ourselves in our revolt. It's much more, it expands, we require our own temporality. And then we had the Yellow Vests, who expanded this in a more Ugelanian way, let's say, democratic confederalism. There was the durability of the struggle, there was long distance. And the people were inhabiting, let's say, they were spending a lot of time in the roundabouts, in the blockades, which gave time to the seeds of democratic institutions to blossom. And further on, having learned the lesson from previous protest movements from before, they have created an effort to create a democratic confederation with something which echoes also Karol Polanyi and his idea of commune of communes. They created the assembly of assemblies, and also they require their own tempo. If we think of Lefebvrean rhythm analysis, they said no to the tempo which is being set by the nation-state politics, which are very quick. They require face-to-face debate between leaders who make quick decisions behind hidden doors, or the rapidity of capitalist production, which also needs things to be constantly accelerating. They said no, we demand a humane temporality, so we will work only, we will protest only Saturday and Sunday. And interesting that this is supposedly the temporality saved for leisure time. They refuse that. We say we will not take a break from the hard work week, we will not stay at our home with our families, we will not go to church, instead we will protest. We will demand a different temporality. So we see a dialectic relationship between this democratic spatiality and the democratic temporality, creating a direct democratic project which was met with the fiercest way by the state and all its suppressive institutions, because they were frightened that we did not solve just destruction, like it's what we say, the power to destroy, but we say also the power to create, of society to create from below, without hierarchies, without experts. We saw common people creating a proposal, crafting a powerful municipal, let's say, a grassroots, a democratic proposal, which frightened many people in the Macron administration. And we saw that the recent movement, even the Existential Rebellion and other ones, of which I'm as well very critical, but we see still the element of demanding citizen assemblies, sortition, election by lot, and so on, being still there. People still discuss this. And I close with this, that there is nothing determinist in this. We cannot just hope that these movements will create a direct democratic project which to challenge the nation state and capitalism. It have to be people like us as well, determined people who will not be afraid to get their hands, let's say, dirty, to engage with the rest of society beyond any ideological certainty and predetermined manifestos to go out and work, because people are on the streets, societies are boiling, and the question is what we'll do in this. And I believe we have to be out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to stay here? No.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah, it's
better to
better.
switch. Yeah. Thank you for Yavor. Now, the third presenter is Orestis Varkarolis. Actually, the paper is made by the other friend as well, Vangelis Gikalis, a culture of degeneration, resistance for radical cooperators inspired by social ecology. Whatever you are comfortable with. Okay, if you are comfortable.
Hello. Hello, my name is Orestis. I'm a PhD student at Nottingham University, and together with Vangelis, we are members of the Radical Workers Cooperative here in Athens. Our presentation today focuses on the threat of degeneration that cooperatives face, as pictured within the social ecology literature, and on promoting a culture of resistance inspired by social ecology. Hence, while there are a variety of theories proclaiming that workers' democracy is futile within capitalism, our focus here is on the degeneration thesis put forward by Biel and Luxin in the context of social ecology, and its reception by Clark in Municipal Dreams, a social ecological critique of books and politics. And for those that are not acquainted with the term degeneration thesis, here is an open-sided quote from the Verbs and their pioneer research on cooperativism that have shaped the terms of the debate that followed. All such associations of producers that start as alternatives to the capitalist system either fail or cease to be democratic democracies of producers. So, in a nutshell, the Ellen thesis is that due to market pressures, individually owned cooperatives will either fall due to market pressures or due to workers' individualism. Therefore, they propose the advancement of municipally owned enterprises to break individualism and constrain particularism. Clark's response is that municipally owned enterprises face more or less similar market pressures, and that within a transitionary period, citizenship of municipalities may well lack an adequate area. On top of that, he argues that there is no convincing evidence that cooperatives have less potential for libertarian transformation, and that rejecting them is evidence of counterproductive dogmatism.
The sound is alright or low? A little bit.
It's muffled. If you can step back.
Yeah, a little step. Yeah, and a little bit higher. Yeah, one. Yeah.
In terms of methodology, while being embedded as full members within Ecology and a network of radical cooperatives in Athens, and following a responsive action research approach, we identified that these cases represented negative cases in terms of theory. In turn, developing theory that better fits data and promotes a culture of degeneration resistance inspired by social ecology was our response to support radical cooperativism getting better rooted within social movements for the mutual benefit of both. To this end, Biel and Buch's degeneration thesis was broken down to three key propositions, which were juxtaposed with empirical findings. These three propositions are that you are doomed to fail due to market pressures unless you are municipally owned, that if you are commercially viable, you will probably fail as an alternative unless the municipality constrains you, and that if you are not aligned with our political plan, maybe it is because you are apolitical. So, along these lines, the Workers' Cooperative Network of Athens has proven to be quite a negative case. Judging therefore from the low rate of mortality, there seems to be some room of maneuver within capitalism. Moreover, self-constraint towards a profit-seeking mentality has also been exhibited through adopting collective ownership, a constant preoccupation with keeping prices low, and avoiding hiring non-members within the collectives. Last but not least, there is clearly a political intent if one reads the identity statements of the Workers' Cooperative Network of Athens, even though it has been relatively thwarted by not being that well received from other movement actors and problems that the cooperatives themselves face in their everyday lives. Hence, to better advance the radical cooperatives, a new culture of resistance seems to be required for both resisting the degeneration and getting better rooted within anarchistic movements. To this end, the social ecology strategy of calling out the state and developing dual power can be turned into developing a dual economy through radical cooperativism, promoting a concerted movement between workplaces from inside out that takes advantage of the scarce resources within the network, and promoting a mutually reinforcing relation among movements. In this sense, the case of the network is an anomalous case for the degeneration thesis advocated by Biel and Wilson, which empirically support Malatesta in that cooperatives do not naturally or by reason of their intrinsic value lead to human emancipation, but can be producers of good and evil, today organs of emancipation, of social transformation, tomorrow serving the forces of reaction and revolution. All depends on whether they limit themselves to the real function as defendants of the immediate interests of their members, or are animated and influenced by the anarchist spirit, which makes the ideal stronger than sectional interests. And by anarchist spirit, I mean that deeply human sentiment which aims at the good of all, freedom and justice for all, solidarity and love among the people. This is not an exclusive characteristic only of the declared anarchists, but it inspires all people who have a generous heart and an open mind. That's it.
Thank you. Now, thank you for finishing but hopefully at question time you can use your time now. Now, three interesting presentations. I'm sure you have interesting questions too. Yeah, we are waiting comments, contributions, questions. I will start from the back.
Hello. It was very interesting, all the the speeches. I would like a question that I think connects all the three pieces. It's mainly directed to Yavor. As regards the relationship between ecology, temporality and democracy. And I would like to place another element. You talked about duration, you talked about ordinary life, and Federico as well. And I would like to place the question of urgency. Because I had a talk with Nikos yesterday, and I asked him, I was wondering whether the ecological crisis that we face today, which is a matter of urgency in the meaning that we do not face like an ancient society, an environment that is not on the brink of extinction. This urgency, what does it mean for the scope of direct democracy? And I would like to argue that there is this trend or fear of ecofascism. But given what Buxton said, that the ecological problem is also a problem of social relationship, and the core value of fascism and capitalism is domination. I was wondering what you have to say about this thing. Does it pose an opportunity, given the risk, for direct democracy? Is it something that we should move forward more urgently as well? Do we have the time to create our own time, like Federico said, which I agree? And that is my... Thank you.
Yavor, you want to start?
Because there was another.
Okay. Another question?
Still the microphone.
Okay, thank you. A trick. It was just a remark because I think it's very inspiring to hear you, like Federico, you three, and also the other people who spoke this morning or yesterday. And I think it's really energy that you give us, and you give us also the energy that of the people that you work with, and the energy and the hope. And I think we would need to have more frequently this kind of messages more regularly, because I think, to me personally, if I don't know, but once a week I had a little message like this, I think it could change my life and give me energy to act more in my day-to-day life. And so I don't know if the TRISE website is a good medium to do that, to put these messages or this newsletter. But I think we should, even if there is lots of newspapers nowadays, but together to have these messages more regularly could be very interesting.
Thank you.
You want to have more questions?
One more question. Can we take one more? I actually too late. No.
She decide. I just follow. Who's here?
Actually, can we
Go this way.
make the woman voice?
I've spoken. Okay.
There's not a microphone.
Okay. So this links to the previous comment and is about the building of a culture of resistance. So I found that really interesting. I also checked the literature to see if there's anything about building a culture of resistance, so very little, you're right. I want to say one thing about that, which might be useful. This comes from feminist activism and research, that quite often when people begin to join a group and to get involved, they experience a period of disempowerment. They go through a kind of shock, and it takes a lot of work and good work by a group to be able to get past that. So one thing that's really important in building a culture of resistance is what we actually do with each other and for each other, how we try to embody our values. And I think that goes a long way towards building a culture of resistance, and something we don't always talk about, what we do in our groups.
Thank you. The questions are related to this, transform, engage as well.
Yeah.
I would like to catch up from the question of Alexandros.
One more question, actually,
Okay,
can we get?
one more, yes.
Thank you. So I would like to ask a simple question, but about something that is, I think, quite worrying, because building a culture of resistance, I think we have some sort of idea about who we want to resist to and what forms of thinking and of economies and we want to resist to. But if there is two main political trends growing in Europe right now, it's probably, arguably, the ecological one and the nationalistic one. And more we see the two trends joining, and we see the spectre of not only fascism but eco-fascism re-emerging. And I want to ask you the question of how do you place a culture of resistance in this context of eco-fascism, where in France we see the far right using arguments of localism, of local food production to reinforce their identitary politics. We also see that on the other side of of Asia and China, where people argue that a strong state is able to plant billions of trees in one national program, which is unable to do in democracies. So these arguments are thriving right now, and ecofascism is becoming a real threat more and more. So I would like to ask you, in this context of culture of resistance, what should we do about this?
I'm sure more questions will come up. I can see a couple of more hands up. Can we go one round first and then the second round? Okay, who wants to?
Okay, I think they're interrelated, the two questions. I think excellent questions. I would focus on Alexandros one, because it's very intriguing. And I have been thinking on this topic. And in the beginning I was actually very hopeful, because I was thinking by introducing this new dimension which presses our society to think outside of the box and to try to reinvent politics in a different way, I thought that it can be something good. But then again, not only with the fascists, I would not say that it's the problem only the eco-fascist tendency which is rising, but it is also this modernist tendency inside the left, which is also, and I see a certain unity on a global scale between authoritarian Stalinist type of left together with far right. This is happening, for example, in my Bulgaria, where such groups are attacking together LGBTQ people, anarchists, and so on, because they see a common problem of the multiculturalization which they attribute to liberalism, but then again to anti-statism and to anti-authoritarian activists. So they kind of find a common ground. So I think this is what is problematizing me, because with this new temporality of the urgency which requires the climate catastrophe, I think it introduces a new tempo, which is even more than the one that the government of Macron tried to impose on the yellow vests. And it's not by chance that with this, when we speak more and more about this, we hear more and more talks that, okay, the things are so urgent, so we need very quick decisions. We cannot waste time. We need to introduce something even more rapid. So let's put a dictator, a green one. We'll discuss his rest colors, but let's be green at first, and to protect us. And then it's what Nico suggested yesterday, that thinking like this, we might end up in a beautiful green prison.
Yeah.
So it is anti-ecological in a way. So I'm very much problematized with what you say, and I think it is an on-point thing, and I think there is no easy answer to this. The only solution that I can see is we being on the ground and trying to intervene. Because as I said before, it's boiling everywhere. Like Paul Mason said 1 decade ago, when everywhere was boiling, now we see the same thing. So I think it's up to us.
Shall I answer also, Theo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Shall I also answer to you, or is that?
Go for it.
Okay. So I think that a cultural resistance should address both of the problems, highlighting that what is needed is an holistic approach, and it should answer to both of them and potentially to everything. And I mean, oh no, come on, Fede, everything is impossible. But if you think, if we really want to change society, it's not about giving an answer. It's not giving a blueprint or a ready-made solution for everything, but to be ready to address any situation. So that is a very big task, and also I think that this is one of the power of social ecology, the holistic approach. It's not just about the environment, it's not about poverty, it's not just about human rights, but it's a general overview. So we cannot just, one person cannot do everything, but as a movement or as a people, we should start to address everything. And regarding to the suggestion about what we should do for us, I mean, I totally agree. I think that in our movements we have, and I grew up in this movement, we have a very masculine approach, and as a white male from the middle class, I'm one of the results of this. So we definitely have to work a lot about how we structure our groups, and the talk about burnout from yesterday is part of how to build our cultural resistance that is not just speak about out there, but it's also speaking about us, and the concept of prefigurative politics is something very, very important, because we cannot postpone to see tomorrow the change that we want, but we should be the change. So definitely to work a lot on ourselves, on the groups, and at the same time taking the streets. Yeah.
Orestis, would you like to? Okay, second round. Can we go behind?
Okay, I would like to address a question to the third speaker, Orestis. A comment and a question. I beg to disagree with your conclusion. Because you presented a kind of wishy-washy situation that radical cooperatives can be either reactionary or progressive, emancipatory, depending, I don't know on what. Perhaps we should take into consideration also the internal organization of cooperatives, which are based on egalitarian relationships, on the idea of having assemblies, inner assemblies, on having the principle of one man, one vote that equalizes, let's say, the members of the commune.
Could you please, the language should be inclusive, not man. One human, you said man only.
Yes,
one man.
because
one
this is, yes, one human, one vote, but this is a cliche, you know, it's in quotation marks, if you like. I use it in quotation marks because it's a standard expression. So this kind of, let's say, egalitarian inner organizational structure of cooperatives socializes the members differently as if from, let's say, being working in capitalist firms. So I think that this is a crucial criterion in orienting communes, or cooperatives, into a progressive orientation, if you like, mission. Plus also, last point, they tend to have interpersonal relationships with both customers, suppliers, and other cooperatives. So this creates a kind of communal framework of consociation. Thank you.
There was a woman here, with the black, a woman in black,
One thing I wanted to ask Federico was about his proposition when it comes to how we create a culture of resistance. So you mentioned discover, engage, transform as 3 steps, I guess, on the way there. And I would say, okay, somehow we do this already, right? So it's not like, we haven't done any of these steps. So what's your suggestion around doing this differently? Okay? And another one is, you talked about culture. So to my mind, culture is how we do things. So it has a lot to do with action, behavior. And you mentioned knowledge production. So, it's just want your comment on that, what you mean with knowledge production, and if it does that when it comes to creating culture. Okay.
I don't know. Well, from this side, yeah. He was handing.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I will just have a quick question to Yavor. Just have a quick question to Yavor to maybe question the idea that the Gilets jaunes, our movement that developed that develop a movement, a municipal movement. That's something we could discuss. I think one of the main requests from the movement was this referendum of citizenship initiative, and it was not. It didn't go beyond the idea of the nation states, and it's also very present in the references of the movement. Maybe because also of the republicanism history of France, but yeah, this is my question.
We have left 5 minutes to finish off this session. I apologize from the other friends, but we will start with Orestis.
Well, I'm not sure I got exactly what you said. I think that what I'm trying to say is that there's no law that cooperatives, radical cooperatives are doomed in this capitalistic context. That's the only. That's how I use this quotation to say that it's not that predetermined what will happen. So I don't know what else.
Federico.
Yeah, allora, so just to speak about the concept of culture, I just read a very basic definition. Culture is an umbrella term which encompasses the social behavior and norms found in human society, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capabilities, and habits of the individual in these groups. So that was a very general overview, and I use the term only linked to the concept of resistance. So what I highlight with these two concepts together is try to have exactly this umbrella term that means social behavior, norms, knowledge, beliefs, art, law, customs, and so on, that are related to the resistance. That the resistance is intended as the scream of no, so going to the streets, we don't want this, and at the same time form a resistance that say, okay, we want these things, we are doing this, there are alternatives. So this is how I put together the two terms. And I'm not exploring from an anthropological point of view the concept of culture and so on, because I'm not interested in that. On the other point is on the concept of discover, engage, transform. Yes, I mean, it is true. Many social movements already are doing this. What I'm suggesting is, what I did or I tried is to systematize this kind of approach. And I'm saying, look, we are not winning at the moment, and I'm very sincere. What shall we do? We should find a different culture of resistance. How can we achieve that? And so I'm giving suggestions. So in a way to systematize that approach. And maybe many social movements are doing this in a very natural way, or maybe without thinking. Or maybe they can find interesting. Maybe they just do, for example, the part of discover. How many times we do a solidarity event and we invite someone from Chiapas or from Latin America or from Germany, and we have very nice talks together. We hang out with a beer and we are fun. And then that event finished there. So we learn about interesting stuff happening in the rest of the world, but then we're not going in the phase of engage and we are not going to the phase of transform. Yeah, maybe, oh yeah, that they are doing that kind of action. Okay, yeah, let's try. Yeah, that is good, but can we do that in a systematized way? So, yeah.
So regarding the yellow vests, when I refer to them as a municipalist in a libertarian sense of the term, I refer to a certain extent to the form around which they organized their struggle, which was undeniably close to this. I know that many of their demands were problematic or contradictory, but the fact is that they have been drafted, some of them via internet, as long as I know. Others were drafted at assemblies. And the thing is, and I think here we make very often a mistake, that we expect for such diverse and massive popular movements to act like political organizations with a certain ideology or agenda. And I have been also problematized with all this thing with the referendums going around the air whenever we speak about democracy. But then again, I see something positive in this. It is not the referendum as such that I consider a democratic tool. I do not. But what I see is that the social imaginary, on a rapidly spreading pace, almost everywhere we hear about this, even in supposedly backward countries like Bulgaria, from where I'm from, people start speaking like almost 10 years ago about referendums. And what I find important is that in their world, which have been mediated by medias, by political talks, by political parties all their life, and many of these people have survived the Soviet regime when it was a political darkness, a political desert. And even people in Greece, people in France, people from the middle class, from the working class and so on, in their narrow world, as they have, as it has been shaped, referendum is a way for people to express and to enforce directly their own will. So I think the fact that the Yellow Vest placed such an insistence on this, it's a hopeful thing that they start scratching the surface of genuine politics, which politics from their beginning were something about taking the matters of our polis, of our city, at our own hands. So yes, there was much problem to the say we to Rick, but then again I say there was a deeper meaning in it.
Thank you to three interesting presenters. You can grab them during the break, lunchtime, to build a new culture of resistance. The suggestion is really wonderful. You can start in Athens. You can carry this energy to your hometown or your countries. Social ecology embrace all the colors, not only black, green, red. We are rainbow colors. I really like the comment by Yavor. We don't want a green prison. We want every color in our society. Thank you.